Good evening. Welcome to An Economy for All, How Can Dane County Excel? Presented by the League of Women Voters of Dane County. I'm Sue Jenick, and I'm the Program Director for the Dane County League. The League is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that doesn't take positions on candidates or parties, but does advocate for issues. This forum is being recorded and will be available on our website in a few days. This forum will survey 3 innovations that could help unleash even more economic vitality for Dane County and prosper segments of our population currently hampered from full participation in our county's economy. The League supports legislation, policies, and programming to promote economic equity and support the democratic principle of common social good, and opposes all legislation, policies, and programming that enable the unhealthy concentration of wealth and power. The League of the U.S. supports programs, services, and policies at all levels of government to expand the supply of affordable, quality childcare for all who need it, in order to increase access to employment and to prevent and reduce poverty. Our panelists tonight include Jason Fields, President and CEO of the Madison Region Economic Partnership, who will discuss how the organization works to ensure that resources are available to public-private partnerships in the 8-county region surrounding Madison. Ruth Schmidt, Executive Director of the Wisconsin Early Childhood Association, will address how that organization, with over 2,500 early childhood professionals in Wisconsin, advocates for policies, programs, and research that supports childcare professionals and the children they teach. Blake Roberts, manager of the Madison Forward Fund, will inform us about the pilot program currently being conducted by Madison to determine if an unrestricted stipend can be part of a successful program to get people back on their feet. Before we hear from our panelists, I will give our land acknowledgement statement. In owning our past and charting our future, we, the League of Women Voters of Dane County, recognize the indigenous peoples who are the original stewards of the lands on which we now live, while we struggle to learn more about the current and ongoing context of colonialism. League formation began more than a century ago in 1920 with women's suffrage, but nearly 2 centuries ago, even prior to the 1848 creation of the state of Wisconsin, an 1832 treaty forced the Ho-Chunk to cede their territory of Teejop, or the 4 Lakes. Both the federal and state governments repeatedly but unsuccessfully sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connections across all barriers of heritage and difference. We continue this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. In Dane County, we are all standing on the stolen ancestral lands of the Ho-Chunk people. We pay respect to their elders, past, present, and future. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together today. The League is grateful for the past, present, and future guidance of Wisconsin's Native nations. Thank you. And now for our program. I will introduce each speaker more fully before they speak. We will take questions at the end of all presentations. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. Our first speaker is Jason Fields. Jason represented MADREP, the Madison Region Economic Partnership, in January, or joined that organization in January 2021, and was recognized as the certified economic developer by the International Economic Development Council in September 2022. Prior to joining MADREP, he served as a Wisconsin state legislator. Jason represents the United States as a senator of the World Business Angel Investment Forum. He is founder of the Financial Promise Foundation, Inc., a nonprofit organization that teaches personal finance and business literacy. He is also the founder and managing director of Dark Knight Capital Ventures, a venture fund that seeks to invest in underrepresented founders across America. Jason, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you to the League of Women Voters of Dane County. Good to see Ruth and Blake Roberts. And so I will try to speak quickly because let me put my timer on you all, because as a former politician, you give us a microphone and we'll be here all night. So what we do at MADREP, we are a full-fledged economic development agency. And what that means is that we do business attraction, business development, business expansion and growth. And what you start to see now is that economic development also incorporates community development and workforce development. So for all of you all listening, for the most part, to sum all that up, our job is to ask the question, to continually ask and answer this question. Are we a great place to live, work, and play? And then if the answer to that is yes, then the next question is, can we be better? And if the answer to that is no, then what do we need to do in order to be that, to be better, or to become the best place to live, work, and play? A subset of that is, are we a great place to live, work, and play? And then for who, right? Because we know that not everybody has all the tools or places that exist or resources to be empowered. So that's in a nutshell what we do. Next slide, please. So part of this discussion is, so what does MADREP do? And I'm just going to give you just a few bits of what we do, because Lord knows it's a lot. And one of the things that we've been doing for the last 2 years now is we are responsible for administering, if you look and see WEDC, Governor Evers, the Main Street Bounce Back. And this is a $10,000 grant that was geared towards those individuals who either suffered or went out of business because of the COVID, because of the pandemic, or they had a hard time. And so what we did is we said yes to being the administrators of this grant. The good thing about this is it's $10,000 for those individuals who want to become entrepreneurs, business people, want to begin to write their own tickets and look to get back into the economy, either by locating into a space that was either once empty or a space that either, someone left or they're expanding. And so the gist of that is a real easy program that you get. You get $10,000. The only requirement is that you have a business, you sign a lease that could be for 12 months, and it doesn't matter how much your rent is. And this is the beautiful part about this. Your rent could be $200 a month. You still get the full $10,000 for your business expenses. And so that's one of the areas where we partnered with state government to say, how do we look to answer those questions? How do we get people back on their feet, particularly those individuals who, they've had businesses and due to the pandemic, they lost out on those. Next slide, please. So as we go around our 8-county region, there are 3 things that continually pop out: transportation, childcare, and workforce. And so whenever you look at any county, and we cover 8 counties, Those are the top issues that continue to come up. It's access to capital, it's child care, transportation, and housing, I should say. So what we did at MadRep is we went into partnered with Commute Enterprise. Those of you who've rented cars, we created a van pool for individuals who had a hard time getting to work. I was challenged by County Executive Parisi. He said, Jason, we need to get people to work. What can you do? So MadRep said, okay, we'll partner with Commute Enterprise. We subsidize a van, and that will pay $500 to have this van take employees to and from work. Now we have 3 vans on the road, and sooner than later, you'll all be seeing the vans with our logos on them. And what we wanted to do was, again, when we talk about for who, certain parts of our rural areas, this is a huge issue. And so our vans are not only meant to transport people in Dane County, but also people from Dane County out and from people from outside Dane County in. And from Beaver Dam to Mayville, Wisconsin Dells to Portage. So one of the things we wanted to do was, when you looked at the inflation, the economics, one of the things that we felt we could do was, can we help people save money by offering them van pools so that they wouldn't be necessarily affected as much by gas prices. You can see the more cars we get off the road, the better we're doing for the environment, and it's economically friendly because now you're not paying as much if you had to drive your own car. So we started this pilot program, and soon you'll be seeing our vans on the road transporting workers to and from their businesses. Next slide. And I should be ending in about 2 minutes. Another issue when I first got here was broadband. And shout out to, I think she's on here, Natalie Yar, who in the Cap Times, she did a story today. You all can go check that out around broadband. And she's quoted myself and Gene Daha from our office. We said, how do we look at competing globally? We know for a fact that if you do not have broadband or internet access, kids cannot do schoolwork. We've had kids sitting in the lots of McDonald's just trying to get on the internet to do their homework. So one of the things we wanted to do was, let's see how we can start to address this broadband problem, not just in rural areas, but in urban areas too, where it's not affordable. So we launched the beginning a broadband speed test. One of the things you all see was that in order for us to determine who has broadband or who doesn't, we need everybody to take a test to see who has what. And so we launched this speed test. Natalie wrote about it. And in addition to that speed test, once we determine who has what broadband, here's another thing that MadRep is doing. We've partnered with certain carriers and providers, because what we see now is there's a job component where we can start training kids in apprenticeships to become broadband service technicians. So we tied that jobs component into that. Next slide. And this is my last slide. So we do quite a bit around economic development. Here is something that we're going to be launching into. I've gotten calls from several legislators, as well as the Evers administration. And what they've asked was, Jason, what kind of policy issues and items should we be looking at? And so what we did in MadRep is we asked our board members, we asked our allies in rural areas and urban areas, we asked the businesses that you see on that page, give us your ideas of what we should be working on. And these were some of the top items that we're taking to Governor Evers and to the Wisconsin State Legislature. Number one, which I believe kills a number of birds with one stone. Can we incentivize mixed development to build or combine childcare, housing, and even transportation? Can we look at putting childcare workers in the state's retirement plan or on the state's health plan? We know there's a shortage, and we know if we can address this issue, then we'll make a dent in people who may not have the fortune or luxury. We'll give them some kind of relief. And so I don't want to go through all of these, but I want you to just take a look at the reducing the barriers to employment. If we can get these things done, we feel like we'll make a huge dent in helping people be empowered to be successful. Tax credits, TIF reform, all those things. But for sake of time, I really want to just focus on some of the items that specifically tie us into working with government and the private sector and you all to make some of these issues a reality that we can address. We can solve some of these problems. With that, I'll be quiet, Sue, because I think I'm 8 minutes, and that's 3 minutes than what I had planned for.
Thank you, Jason. I'm sure there will be some questions for you. In fact, I've thought of a few myself, but I'll hold off. Our next speaker is Ruth Schmidt. For over 20 years, she has led the Wisconsin Early Childhood Association, Wisconsin's largest membership and service organization for early childhood educators and the state affiliate of the National Association for the Education of Young Children. Ruth serves on Governor Tony Evers' Early Childhood Advisory Council and Congressman Mark Pocan's K-12 and Early Childhood Education Advisory Group. Under her direction, WICA launched and leads Raising Wisconsin, a statewide policy initiative powered by a multi-sector coalition. She is a founding member of Wisconsin Partners and is the recipient of the 2019 Community Changemaker Award by Community Shares of Wisconsin. Ruth earned her bachelor's degree from Grinnell College. Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you, Sue. Good to be here tonight. We'll wait while the slides are pulled up. Here we go. So tonight, I'm here to talk to you about early care and education in our state, a little bit more specifically in Dane County, talk about challenges, opportunities, and how we move forward together in our state to address childcare needs. First, I want to start by just giving you a teeny bit of information on my association. We've been around since the early 70s. As Sue indicated, we work to support childcare programs and to support early childhood educators. We do this through a mix of innovative services, including scholarships for credit-based education, stipends for people who reach levels of education and stay in the field working with our young children. We do it through a nutrition program in all 72 counties of the state, a shared services network for childcare programs, a licensing assistance project to help childcare programs get started and become licensed and provide care. And then, as Sue indicated, we also do quite a bit in the lane of policy and advocacy work in our state, which to me is when we talk about the next frontier in childcare and how we address childcare, it comes from this lane of policy and advocacy. Next slide, please. So today I want to start by telling you a little bit of a story from the perspective of parents and what parents are experiencing in childcare. We are hoping to lean into the voice of childcare, of working parents in our childcare advocacy. We feel like it's critically important for our legislators to be hearing from parents. And so to do this, we've been engaging parents around the state in telling their stories. This is a story from Anne. Anne is a Wisconsin parent of one child. And in the interview we had with Anne, she indicated, she said, it ended up being over 30% of my monthly income. I couldn't afford childcare if I was on my own. We want to grow our family in the future, but childcare is something that honestly terrifies me purely from the cost aspect. To me, it's not okay that parents need to make decisions about whether or not to have children and expand families purely out of fear of what the cost of childcare is to get these children into high quality care while their parents work. Next slide, please. So what is the cost of care in Wisconsin? And this is going to be statewide. And what I would say is universally for Dane County, you can increase what you see on the slides here. So the average cost of infant care in Wisconsin is slightly over $12,000. Again, in Dane County, in the Madison market, you will often see that going up to $18,000 to $20,000 a year. 4-year-old care is a little bit less expensive, but both of these figures are exceeding what families are often paying for the cost of their housing. And it exceeds what we pay for tuition at our 4-year university system, which leaves working families needing to cover between 20 and 30% of their household income in the covering the cost of care if they have children. Assuming you can afford care, you're now faced with the issue of where can you find care? Next slide, please. So Wisconsin is marked as a childcare desert. This is something that is pretty similar in many states of our nation. We lack access to care for many of our working families. In Wisconsin, about half of our state is marked as a childcare desert. That number goes up substantially in rural areas of the state. A study done by the Bipartisan Policy Center in looking at all of the counties in Wisconsin indicates that in Dane County, there is unmet need for about 32% of our children under the age of 5 with all available working parents working outside of the home. And what this means is there's approximately 9,200 children in Dane County who need care where there simply is not regulated care available for them. And so childcare deserts are marked as more than 3 children under the age of 5 for every possible slot of care that's regulated in a given region. Next slide, please. When you look at what happens when you pair working parents, and then you say one of the working parents is working in the field of early care and education, then you're hit with a double whammy for this industry. So Samantha is a Wisconsin parent who was an early childhood educator. She was working in a regulated childcare program. She left to be a stay-at-home parent. She shared with us, she said, I could go to work at Quick Trip, Culver's, Taco John's, any of those places, and I could earn more as a starting wage without needing to have education outside of high school, without needing to invest in continuing education every year, and without taking out student loans. And so for her, she had to make a decision that the cost of care exceeded that of what she was earning as a child care worker, and she chose to leave the field. This isn't a sustainable solution for us. We need to find ways to keep high quality early childhood educators in the field working with our youngest children. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the early childhood field. This is an educated field. It's probably the highest educated, lowest paid field in Wisconsin. Over 80% of our early childhood educators have some form of higher education outside of high school. Over 50% have at least an associate's degree or better, and yet they are earning poverty level wages. Over 30% of them rely on public assistance and don't have access to benefits that many of us take for granted, like healthcare, dental care, paid time off, paid sick leave, all standard benefits. We did a survey of childcare providers that were participating in our shared services network. We had about 300 respondents to this survey. Close to 70% said that they are in the process of attempting to hire full-time staff. And because of those hiring processes and the fact that they can't hire staff right now, over 30% of them have had to close classrooms. Just that 100 childcare programs alone, closing classrooms, represents a loss of care for 9,200 children, just out of those 100 programs. And this is happening over and over again across our state. Next slide. So let's talk about the childcare business model and why it's broken. What doesn't work? Childcare has been said to be a failed market. It does not operate like other free market enterprises. And that's largely because it is completely funded on the backs of working parents. So I'm presenting to you here on this slide just an average group childcare program in Wisconsin. They're open 10 hours a day. They serve about 50, 55 children. They have 1 childcare director. They have 5 lead teachers, 1 for each classroom, and they have 4 assistant teachers. Parents are paying on average $10,000 a year. And so what you see is they're collecting about $520,000 in parent fees. And then you look at where that money has to go. There's some costs that childcare programs can't control. That's rent, utilities, maintenance, playground, upkeep. And childcare programs are spending about 20, 22% of their budget on that. You look at other operating expenses such as materials, administration, food costs, curriculum costs for keeping their program operating. You're looking at another 30% of their budget. So what does this leave? For this model, what you see is it leaves $236,000 left to cover the wages for 10 staff people. And this is not unusual. And so this, you do the math, it's super simple. 10 people, $23,000 a year to cover wages, benefits, payroll taxes. It is not a sustainable model. We need a way to infuse more revenue into our childcare programs without relying on working parents to cover that cost. Next slide. Childcare, we like to say, is the workforce behind the workforce. Without childcare, parents with young children cannot be in the workforce. It impacts our businesses. They can't hire people. It creates communities that are not livable, and it results in significant economic losses to our state. Bipartisan Policy Center has estimated those losses to be between $4.5 to $6.5 billion. In Dane County alone, the economic impact of the childcare crisis exceeds $300 million. And so you can see this is an equation where we need parents to be working, we need care to be available so that our businesses can be profitable, so our economies can be strong and our communities can be livable. The Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, Department of Children and Families paired up to do a survey of businesses in Wisconsin in early 2022. What they found is there's significant understanding about the importance of childcare now from business leaders in our state. 4 in 5 business leaders are saying that without affordable childcare, Wisconsin businesses will continue to face workforce shortages, and that the economy is impacted by a family's ability to secure care for their children. 70% say that this needs to be a concern for Wisconsin businesses to find ways to support childcare. And yet I would argue we are not seeing trends in the right direction when it comes to these additional potential resources for working families. Next slide. So we've talked a little bit about the gloom and doom of what's going on in childcare. What do we say when we're talking about what is the vision? How do we go from where we are now to the future? And how do we do it in the middle of a dramatic fiscal cliff that is going to be hitting our state in early January 2024? To me, this is about the importance of using our political voice and doing advocacy in a really coordinated, strong way across our state. Next slide. Many of you probably know that throughout COVID, the feds put significant money directly into childcare. In Wisconsin, what you see here is how all of those dollars have been spent in our state. I think it's important to note that this money, while it came from the feds, it had to be approved in a spending plan by both the governor and the Joint Finance Committee. So there has been bipartisan support for these investments in childcare throughout COVID. The program that we want to draw the most attention to, that Wisconsin was recognized as being an innovator and getting money out the door rapidly into the pockets of childcare programs so they could keep their doors open, is called Childcare Counts. You'll see it in many places on the slide in front of you. Childcare Counts put money directly into bank accounts of childcare programs on a monthly basis so that they can increase wages for their staff, so that they can put funding into their operating expenses, and in no small part, so that they can continue to keep the cost of their care low, or what we would consider low for working families, even though it is outrageously expensive. But COVID, the increased cost during COVID would have resulted in many childcare programs needing to have dramatic increases in their rates without this funding. In January of 2024, we will lose full funding for childcare counts, which ends up being a net loss of about $200 million a year that currently is funding childcare programs. To put it into perspective, prior to COVID, the state of Wisconsin invested the bare minimum of revenue it needed to draw down its federal block grant dollars to fund our childcare subsidy. That was $16 million, or $50 for each child under the age of 5. I think we can do better. We're going to be facing a fiscal cliff in January of 2024 of $200 million a year. This has led to this formation of Raising Wisconsin. Next slide, please. So Raising Wisconsin is an initiative that we started in 2019 as a way to begin to sort of pool and leverage multi-sector support for childcare in the state of Wisconsin. COVID, I think, propelled these initiatives forward in terms of the importance and the need to be poised to have a hefty campaign going into the 2023-25 budget biennium. And so the goal of Raising Wisconsin is focused on high quality, affordable childcare for all families, early educator compensation, and optimal child health and well-being. And to that end, we have a multi-sector coalition. Next slide, please. That is calling for a $300 million state investment. So state general purpose revenue investment into childcare. We have never seen anything like this in our history in Wisconsin. I would argue that if we do not do this, we will see childcare programs come the end of 2023 needing to close their doors, needing to lay off staff. We will see reduced capacity of care, and we will see childcare programs faced with needing to raise their rates in considerable ways to make up for this loss of revenue. So we know that the state has a significant budget surplus right now. We know there's a lot of sharks at the tank waiting to try and get in on a piece of that revenue. We hope that Wisconsin prioritizes childcare, and we hope that you all join us in this work. Next slide, please. So how do you become part of Raising Wisconsin? You can sign up at raisingwisconsin.org to become a member of this effort, to get action alerts from us, opportunities to use your voice, ways to tell your story, toolkits for advocacy. And so we're asking you to sign up, to follow Raising Wisconsin on social media. And next slide, please. If you want to learn more about my association, Wisconsin Early Childhood Association, you can go to wisconsinearlychildhood.org, learn more about all the resources and services that we have available for early education across the state. That concludes my formal presentation. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much. A lot of food for thought there. Our final speaker is Blake Roberts. Blake is the program manager for Madison's Guaranteed Income Research Program, the Madison Forward Fund. She has over a decade of experience designing, implementing, and evaluating economic justice, labor, workforce, and social welfare programs. She has an MA in Urban and Environmental Policy and Planning, and an MS in Food Policy and Applied Nutrition with a concentration in food security and social welfare from Tufts University. Welcome, Blake.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Blake Roberts, and as Sue said, I'm the manager for the Madison Forward Fund, Madison's new guaranteed income program, which I'm very excited to be here to talk about. And thanks to Sue and everyone at the League for hosting this event and for inviting me. I'm very honored to be here. So I'll talk a little bit about what guaranteed income is, the movement behind it. I will share some details about the Madison Forward Fund, our new pilot, and then hopefully end with some thoughts on how everyone on this call can connect to guaranteed income. Next slide, please. Thanks. So I'm going to start talking about the rationale behind the idea for guaranteed income, or some people call it basic income, using both of those terms interchangeably. So we know that the need exists. Poverty exists in every community. It's here in Wisconsin, in Dane County, families are struggling. And the social safety net that exists plays a huge role in addressing poverty, but we know that it's not enough. Programs often work by giving a little bit of funding for food each month, a little bit of support for housing, maybe some for childcare, but as Ruth pointed out, definitely not enough. And families are still struggling, and it's really restricted on how those benefits can be used. It's really allocated for, a little bit for each component of families' budgets. And we also know that many people are working, often more than full-time, often working multiple jobs or doing unpaid labor, like care work, caring for family, for children, for elderly family members. And in spite of that, they're still not able to get enough government assistance, either because so much of our social safety net is tied to work. And so if you're not working according to a very specific definition of work, many people are just not able to access those benefits. Or for other reasons, people might not be able to access public benefits such as immigration status. And so we know that there's a need, and the idea behind guaranteed income is really to supplement those other programs that already exist, and really trying to change the idea that everyone is equally worthy of a basic level of financial stability, a basic level of income, whether you are working or not, and what type of work you are doing, what type of labor you are doing, you are still equally worthy. And so the movement behind guaranteed income is really trying to shift that idea that worthiness or deservedness should not be tied to work specifically. And so the way that guaranteed income works is it's, people often call it cash assistance, meaning that it's not physically cash, but just that it is paid directly to recipients and it's unrestricted. So people can use it however they see best fit for their own family, for their own situation. It can be spent on any sort of need that month. And because we also know that needs change from month to month. So at any given moment, a family might need a little bit of extra cash for diapers, but the next week it might be to supplement their rent or to pay a medical bill, a utility bill, or after that it could be for school expenses. So we know that needs change, and guaranteed income can be very flexible in that sense. Okay, you can go to the next slide. And guaranteed income, basic income is not new. Many people have been fighting for basic income in some form for decades now, including Martin Luther King Jr., the Black Panthers, the National Welfare Rights Organization played a huge role, did a lot of work on this in the 60s and 70s. So there's a great history behind it. It's not new. There is this increased interest in it, I would say recently, particularly around the child tax credit, the expanded child tax credit, which is in a sense a form of cash assistance of guaranteed income. Many families saw or received this cash tax credit during the pandemic, and it had huge impact on the level of poverty across the United States. Okay, next slide. So there's a lot of interest in guaranteed income, in basic income. And in order to be advocating for this as a tool to be fighting against poverty, we know that we need to understand its impact a little bit more, and we need to have some data behind it to really understand how effective it is and whether it can move families out of poverty or not. So here in Madison, Mayor Rhodes Conway has been a huge advocate for guaranteed income in general, and has been fighting for a national guaranteed income program, which I'll talk about more in a little bit, and has also been able to champion a pilot program here in Madison called the Madison Forward Fund, which it's designed as a research study. So not only is it giving out cash funds to low-income Madison families, it's also contributing to the research behind this policy to understand whether this is something that really, what sort of impact can it have in Madison. Okay, next slide. So the city has launched a guaranteed income pilot, which is really exciting. It was launched in September of this year, and sort of some of the basics of it are that it's $500 a month given directly to 155 low-income families in the city of Madison. And it's modeled after a similar program that was started in Stockton a few years ago. And it's a guaranteed income. It runs for 1 year, and it's unconditional payment. So families can spend the money however they wish, and there's no work requirements. And it's really founded on the idea that people experiencing financial hardship, they know best what they need, and that their needs are going to change from month to month. And so this form of income can offer a little bit of flexibility and also some autonomy in being able to choose how to spend their money each month. Okay, next slide. So I mentioned that there are 155 families that are receiving funds. The first payment went out in September, and the last payment will be in August of 2023. So we are right in the throes of it now, which is really exciting. And a number that I think is really important is that we had over 3,000 families apply for this program for just 155 slots. So the need is huge. That's just in the city of Madison alone. We know that beyond that, and in Dane County, the number is even bigger. So the need is definitely there. And the program is set up as a randomized controlled trial. So there's, in addition to the pool of families that are receiving funds, there is another group of families that have volunteered to participate in research but are not receiving funds. And we are tracking outcomes between both of those groups over an 18-month period so that we can really have a good sense at the end of what sort of impact this income is having on families in terms of physical health, mental health, financial stability, employment and workforce participation, civic engagement, and all sorts of things. And we'll be able to compare outcomes between those two groups, which is really exciting. Okay, next slide. And Madison is not alone. So we are part of a national network called Mayors for a Guaranteed Income. And this is a group of mayors that have come together to advocate for a national guaranteed income program, because we know that while Madison and all these other cities that are running pilots, there's about 100 across the country so far. That's a really important aspect of conducting research and understanding the impact of these policies, but it's not going to be a sustainable solution. Municipalities don't have enough funding to be running these sorts of programs for the long term. It really needs to be coming from the national government. So MGI, Mayors for a Guaranteed Income, is doing that. They are advocating for this as a policy on a national level. And it's really great because there is this coordinating body so we will have amazing data at the end to be able to say, not just what is the impact in Madison, but how does it compare to Gainesville, to Birmingham, to New York, all these different places that are running really similar pilots. So I think that's one of the most exciting things about this network. Okay, next slide. And what do we know so far? So in Madison, our pilot has just started. It'll take us, this is a long-term program to be able to, before we can have some data to really see the impact here in our community. But I will say that there has been a lot of promising evidence coming from other pilots, from other research studies, both in the US and other countries. Overall, the evidence is very promising that giving unrestricted cash is really effective for families in terms of financial stability. Just having less volatility each month and having some guaranteed source of income so that there's a little bit of cushion is really huge. We've also seen that in many cases, recipients are more likely to be working when they receive cash payments compared to those people who are not. Or if they are working less, it's actually because they have the option and the choice to leave a job that doesn't pay them enough, and they're able to do other activities that they report are really, really important to them, such as spending time with their kids. We have seen that for families that have children in school, they have better attendance rates, enrollment rates. And then the mental health component, I would say, is really, really huge, much less depression and anxiety. And if you go to the next slide, I can talk a little bit more about that. So stories from recipients, I would say, are very, very powerful that we have seen from other places. So some of these quotes, these are from families in the Stockton experiment that I had mentioned, but parents really talking about having a little bit more room to breathe, a little cushion, and to be able to finally afford things that are not extravagant, I would say, but really just sort of like basic parenting, like being able to take your kid to the movies, or have a special celebration for a birthday, things like that. Okay, next slide. So I just want to wrap up by saying, we know there's a lot of compelling evidence that basic income policies are a very effective tool to be fighting poverty. And in spite of that, in spite of the data and evidence that we have, and there's more and more coming out each month, there's still a lot of challenges to getting uptake for this sort of policy. And a lot of it, I believe, is around really embedded ideas, cultural ideas about who is deserving in our communities and what it means to be on welfare. We have so much that is tied to working, and that if you're not working, then you're not worthy. So I think there's a lot of work that we have to do to change that narrative and to counter some of those really sexist and racist stereotypes about welfare and about poverty. So I think there's a lot of work there to build political support. And then I would say, in Madison, once this 1-year pilot ends, we are hoping that, if we can find funding, there might be an opportunity to continue this program again, to be able to use this as a tool in our community. Many other regions are looking at countywide or statewide programs. So I think that might be something that could be of interest here to really expand it beyond just one community, but to use that tool in a bigger sense. And then advocacy for other cash transfers. So guaranteed income can come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, but again, the child tax credit or the earned income tax credit are forms of cash assistance that I think we can be doing a lot to support. So that is the end of my formal presentation. And thanks again for having me. I look forward to discussing more.
I thought I was unmuted before. All right. Thank you, Blake. We will now turn to our questions from the audience. And again, if you have a question, you can put it in the Q&A, which is at the bottom of your screen. So our first question is about the funding for each of your organizations. People are interested in learning, where do you get your funding from? So Jason, you want to lead off that?
Thank you, Sue. And that's a great question. We fundraise we have to, it's the old school method. Go out and call people who believe in the mission and propose a value added solution and, sell them on the idea that we are working to change these things. We have some small contracts. We do have a contract with the state and with Dane County, small contracts. But for the most part, we're not a membership organization. We are a 5-0. We're a nonprofit. We have to go out and raise the funds to do the things that we want to do.
Do you get any funding from foundations?
We do. One of the issues, so we have a grant writer who she writes for grants. And one of the things that we'll be doing, I'm a huge advocate of financial literacy and business literacy. And so one of the things that we'll be doing is holding some of those classes because what we found is that businesses may not always have the best internal infrastructure, like how to read a balance sheet, how to create P&L statements, and so how to do the things that will keep their businesses going. So we've written the grants and gotten funding from some foundations to teach that class, those financial literacy classes.
Great. And Ruth?
Yeah, so our funding is a little complicated. We get quite a bit of federal funding that comes to different state departments and funds really specific work that we're doing. So our Child and Adult Care Nutrition Program, which reimburses for serving nutritious meals and snacks, is USDA. Our Teach Early Childhood Scholarship Program and our Reward Stipend Program, so credit-based education, and then paying cash stipends to people to stay in the field, has been funded largely through the DHHS, Child Care Development Block Grant funding that comes to Wisconsin, and then comes to us along with significant increases in that funding through the COVID relief dollars. So for instance, our stipend project has gone from being $700,000 a year that gets paid out in cash payments to people in the field to upwards of $22 million right now that we have to pay cash stipends to people who are working in childcare. City of Milwaukee just put $5 million of their local ARPA recovery fund money into paying stipends that are funneling through my organization to educators that work with children in Milwaukee. We also get considerable funding from foundations. So our advocacy work is funded largely through the Pritzker Children's Initiative, and we get funding through Roots and Wings, through American Family Foundation for Corporate and Social Impact, Otto Bremer, so considerable funding that comes to us in that way. And then we get a lot of county level funding. We get a lot of community foundation funding for specific services that are provided in key communities across the state. Probably on average, we are managing upwards of probably 30 to 50 grants at any given time of the year.
Okay, thank you. And Blake?
Sure. So specifically for the pilot program that we are running, it is all privately funded. So all philanthropy and private donors here from Wisconsin. And now I would just say that that's in contrast to many of the other guaranteed income pilots that are running in other places. Many of the other pilots are funded through ARPA dollars, but ours in particular is all private funding.
So that includes not just the research part of it, but the grants that are given to the participants?
Yep. Yeah. So it's almost $1 million directly to families, and that's all privately funded. Mm-hmm.
Okay. We have a question about health insurance for child care workers. It seems to me that the ACA offers affordable health insurance to child care workers. This seems like a much more realistic option than trying to have non-state employees enroll in the state employee health insurance program. What are the barriers to child care workers enrolling in the ACA?
So we have worked since the Affordable Care Act started to support through working with navigators to get early childhood educators on to the ACA. I think it's still an issue that there just is no way to entirely bring down the cost of out-of-pockets for healthcare. And so we still find a need for there to be some sort of subsidies that could be connected with it. There are states that have organized family child care unions that are accessing either Taft-Hartley funds through their unions or have bargained for state benefits. Wisconsin is not one of those states. And there are some states who have recently started programs to incentivize getting educators onto the ACA by using ARPA dollars in a pilot basis to cover those out-of-pocket expenses. So I think it's still this issue of it is complicated to simply get people connected to health insurance, and the need for supports in that and the need for navigators to work specifically within the industry is critical.
Okay, we have a question for Jason about the van service. How do you prioritize and set the van pool routes? It seems like it would be a challenge when people are living in widely dispersed rural areas.
So we don't necessarily set it as a priority. What we do is we go out and we speak with the businesses, organizations that will express an interest in it. Because exactly that point. I mean, we serve a total area of around 1 million people, 8 counties in South Central Wisconsin. So what we do is throughout our partners, we advertise, we talk about the program. And then what we tend to do along with an enterprise, we will contact potential business owners who say, hey, I'm having a transportation problem. And so what we'll do is we'll meet with them and say, we have a van, we'll subsidize it. is there a need for it? So MadRep doesn't necessarily pick. We get the information out and let people pick us, because it would be just very difficult to prioritize. So we let individuals know about the program, and then we consistently put it out, and whoever responds, then we try to meet that need.
Okay. We have a question about for Blake, for the guaranteed income payments. Do those have to be claimed as income on taxes? Is that money counted when determining eligibility for other benefits?
Yeah, I love these in the weeds tax questions. They come up a lot. So the payments that families receive are considered gifts according to the IRS. So for gift payments, if it's under a certain amount each year, that is not considered taxable according to the IRS. And the total amount that each family receives from us is $6,000, which is under the IRS limit. So no, it does not need to be reported on a tax return, and it's not taxable income. And then the question about benefits, yes, and it depends. So in the beginning of my presentation, I talked about all the crazy complex system of public benefits, and everyone has its own criteria for what income it counts when it looks to see if someone is eligible or not. So some programs say that, yes, this income from guaranteed income does need to be included when they assess whether a family or a person is eligible or not for that benefit. And some programs say no. And so, of course, that's a really, really big component for us when we were designing the program, because we want to know what the impact is when you give $500 to someone. But if they end up losing $75 from food share because of receiving this income, because their monthly income has effectively gone up, that really changes the research question, and it changes the impact that it might have on their monthly budget. So a big part of what we did was try to secure waivers with these various programs. And fortunately, we were able to secure a waiver for SNAP for food share, which was really exciting. So this income is not counted for food share benefits, but it is counted for other things like most housing benefits. SSI or SSDI would definitely count, it's unfortunate, but the way we tried to mitigate that at least a little bit is every family talked to a benefits counselor before deciding whether they wanted to enroll or not, so that they could really understand what impact that would have on their various benefits.
Sue, can I jump in just a quick second?
Please.
Follow up. So just a follow-up question. Do you know if childcare subsidy eligibility was waived or not?
Yeah, Wisconsin Shares granted us a waiver, which was wonderful. It was wonderful. Yes, it's a really big deal. All of these waivers are a really big deal. And I was really excited about the childcare one. Madison also has a city childcare tuition assistance program that was waived as well. And then Wisconsin Works also granted a waiver. So, for families that receive these benefits, it is a really huge deal. And so I think the connection both between what Ruth said and Jason said around access to childcare, having affordable transportation and housing, and all of these things are so interconnected. And so I really see guaranteed income as supplementing the work that both of you are doing. It's a yes and, right? We need all of these things.
Okay, we have another question for you, Ruth. How does TANF funding for childcare affect your data? I guess another way of asking that is, did you take that into account in your data?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not positive I am following the question. Are you saying in terms of the cost of care? Like I was going to respond to it earlier in writing, and I couldn't quite figure out what was the aspect that the person who posed it was trying to get at. So in terms of the cost of care, TANF and our Child Care Development Block Grant money. So these are the two pots that come together to fund our child care subsidy program in Wisconsin, which I would say is also woefully underutilized because of the complexity of applying for it, and because there's a lot of child care programs who have stopped accepting it because of a variety of reasons that we don't need to go into right now. But interestingly, Institute for Research on Poverty is studying this also. But the child care subsidies are not paid at the same rate as private pay. There's always a parent pay piece to it that's calculated in, and then child care programs are expected to collect that piece. So in terms of the child care rates, those are based on market rate surveys that are done in the state of Wisconsin. Our child care resource and referral organizations work to collect that data so that we know what those current costs of care are. So that is one piece of the equation. I'm not positive where else the person was hoping I would go with that. But I did also want to say, interestingly, the governor in his last budget had proposed a waiver for childcare, a $10,000 income waiver in terms of eligibility for access to public assistance. It didn't pass, but Kentucky just within the past couple of weeks passed categorical eligibility for childcare workers to receive full subsidies for their children that are in childcare. So there are some states that are doing some interesting work, I think, also in that lane.
Hey, thank you. Jason, could you say more about the broadband program that MadRep has? How you actually carry that out?
Yeah, the whole issue with broadband is it's a couple of issues. Number one, the starting point for us to really figure out, okay, what do we need to do and who has it and who doesn't have it? And so when you see all these dollars coming out from the federal government or the PSC, the problem is that many of these maps have been wrong, and the way they measure who has it and who doesn't have it has been kind of off. And so what we've been trying to do is, through all our partners in the county, is saying, hey, here's a link that you send out to all your residents and businesses, to every constituent you possibly can, and have them take the test. And that test will show us, one, who has broadband service, who has internet, and then it will tell us the quality. How fast is your upload and download speed? Once we have a map, then we can determine, okay, who needs what? What kind of strategy should we use to approach delivering broadband, whether it's the speed and whether it's affordable? So right now, the starting point is, let's see who has it and the quality of what they have. And so right now, MadRep, we've been for about maybe some months now, issuing this out and trying to get everyone in our county to take this test. It's like maybe a minute test, if that. You press a button, it'll register back at our platform. It shows up on a map. These are the people who have it. Here are the speeds. And then what happens is we'll look at that information and data. We'll start designing advocacy, reaching out to, let's say, and hopefully nobody's from these organizations on here. I'm just using them as an example. Charter Communications, TDS, will say, hey, you've said this space has some broadband. We're showing you that it doesn't. So let's have a come to Jesus meeting about what's real and what's not. And once we do that, then we can really start finding solutions. But the first step is we need everybody in our 8 counties to just take the test so we can see who has it. And so we send out a link through our newsletters, through all our county allies and participants to have everybody take that test. And that's the first step. Hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah. And if you send that link to me, we can send it out to our members as well.
Say less, Sue. You'll have it after we get off you'll have it ASAP.
Okay, great. We love to participate in things like that. Blake, I have a question for you about the You had 3,000 applicants and chose 155 participants in the program. What criteria were used to choose those people, or was it done randomly?
Yeah, so there was an application process to make sure that anyone who was going to be selected met the basic eligibility criteria first. So in order to be eligible for the program, the family needed to have income under 200% of the federal poverty line. They needed to have a child under 18 living at home, and they needed to be a City of Madison resident. So once we got that pool of people, that was the 3,000. So 3,000 applicants that met all of those criteria. Then from within that pool, it was a random selection. Because really specifically because we're trying to get a statistically representative sample of the community here, and so it was just random, both for into the group of the families who are receiving funds or the control group, those that are not receiving funds, and anyone who applied and that was eligible had an equal chance of being selected.
Okay, thank you. There's another question for you. What dangers could emerge if someday there was a federally funded GAI? Could the trade-off result in the elimination of all or most welfare programs? This is a hypothetical question, but have mayors discussed this possible dilemma? Federal funding may not always be sustained, and people in need may wind up with less financial support over the long term.
Yeah, I saw that question in the chat and I was really thinking about it because I don't think I have a great answer. I feel like if I were maybe a political strategist, I might have a better sense of, how do you get something funded without adding the risk that it might be taken away later. I wish I had a magic solution for that. I do think that the idea, what I'm hearing from many advocates is that we're not trying to replace anything that exists, really acknowledging that all of the social safety net programs that exist are really important. And so we're not trying to take any of those away, but to augment and to fill in where there's still unmet need. So hopefully that idea would carry through and that it would not result in a national program, but that something was taken away elsewhere. I think people would be, that's not the goal that we're fighting for. But again, I don't know, maybe some of the other people on the call have ideas for how to sort of politically get something like that through without the risk of it being taken away later.
Well, some of the research that we did showed that there's been some what you would call bipartisan support. In other words, conservatives supporting this idea as a way to end the bureaucracy that we now have for the welfare programs that are in place.
And yeah, I can comment on that a little bit, and then Jason was going to say something also, I think. And I think you're right, absolutely right, that one reason this idea is so appealing is that there often, not always, but often is bipartisan support. And the idea that payments can be given out very efficiently, having direct cash payments, and the expanded child tax credit went to millions of families using the tax infrastructure that already exists. And so it can be really efficient, it can be really fast and direct, which is really appealing for many people. Yeah.
Jason?
Yes, I think Blake is absolutely right. I mean, I do think that you have to be somewhat cautious because it's politics, right? I mean, and the things that we all may think are common sense, we've learned are not necessarily common sense. And so I think to Blake's point, if you all remember when there were people advocating for the $15 an hour, one of the issues was, well, if we do this, does it somehow hurt individuals, whether it was true or perceived? You had individuals going, well, I don't necessarily want $15 an hour because if I take that, I'll lose other benefits. And again, whether that's real or not, those are the issues you have to contend with. And like you said, Sue, there are some people who will look at this and go, hey, if we do this, then let's get rid of it. Let's get rid of all the other things. So it has to be, I think, a will strategy. As Blake said, it's not here to take away from anything. Rather, this is just another enhancement that will empower individuals. And I'll say this, and Sue, here is where I believe the league and you all can come in with your advocacy. One of the issues is that, oftentimes we ask the question, why should we be doing these things? And I'm like Ruth, why shouldn't we? Because if you look on the flip side of this coin and you see what's coming down the pipeline, it's not pretty. And so we don't have the luxury to be holier than thou and say we shouldn't be doing some of these things. Because I want to paint a picture for you all, and then I'll be quiet. Imagine a state that, because we don't have childcare workers who can help take care of those children, imagine a generation of children being raised by social media. Imagine a generation of kids not having that love to keep them from going down the wrong path. Imagine parents who get sick and tired and don't have the help. Imagine exacerbated mental illness issues not getting solved. So we don't necessarily have the luxury to be talking about why we shouldn't be doing some of these things. The only question on the table is, what do we need to do in order to get these things done? Because when you pull back the curtains, it's not pretty what we're faced with. And so I think to the degree that those are the kinds of attitudes and things we should be talking about, that's where I think your organization has been phenomenal to the league and will continue to be phenomenal when you walk into the Capitol and advocate on these issues. Because again, I'm 48, my wife and I, we don't have children, but I'll tell you, there's a report that I did and it frightened me. And here's what it said. I don't know if you all are familiar with TikTok, but I just want to paint a picture for you all. The number one career chosen for youth in America was they want to be a TikTok or social media influencer, compared to the number one career in China was an astronaut. Now you fast forward a couple of generations and you see who will win in the long run if that's what we're doing, raising our children to want to be TikTok or social media influencers versus another group of children who want to be astronauts. We got a problem. So we don't have the luxury to not do some of these things that Ruth and Blake are talking about. I know that was a long way of talking about it, but now I'm off my high horse.
So I'm wondering if I can jump in on this too. And I actually really appreciate your high horse, Jason. I'm right there with you. When COVID started and there was this talk about putting money out in COVID relief efforts, and when it came out to states and here's $200 million to put into childcare. Oh, we can't fund something that's going to be a one and done. We just can't do it. We're not going to, if we can't sustain it, we shouldn't be doing it. And I just say, that's just BS, right? This is an industry that has been so hyper under-resourced for so long in childcare. And it's like a lot of low-wage workforces, right? It has been hanging on by a thread for so very long. And it is women, and it is Black and brown women, and it is a race issue, it's a gender issue, it's a pay equity issue. And to me, the conversation is one of not, will we do it? It's simply, how do you do it, right? Where do you build the political will? Do you talk about it as, parents shouldn't have to pay so much? No, there's some legislators who don't think that's an issue. But if you address it from the perspective of employers can't hire people right now because there's no childcare in their communities, this is a workforce issue. We can't recruit businesses into key communities in our state because there's no childcare. You spin it differently, you partner differently. We've got way more businesses at the table with us on childcare issues right now than ever before. And when I looked at the question that was posed in here about beyond providing charitable donations, I mean, I would argue for my industry, I would much rather have your influence than your money right now. We really need people to put their power and their leverage and their influence behind calling for political action. For me, specifically on childcare, on a host of issues, transportation, housing, all of these things, we can keep doing tax cuts. We will keep doing tax cuts in Wisconsin. But the voters, if you look at polling and surveying of what's going on, voters are ready for this. They're ready to see a change. And it's about how do we spin what needs to be done to try and turn the corner on this. Every other industrialized world, every other wealthy nation has figured out how to do this stuff. And we just sit and twirl our thumbs like we don't know what to do. Yes, we do know what to do. We know what the answers are. Sorry.
So I think we've addressed a lot of this question, but I'm just going to throw it out there and see if you have any other ideas about it. What are your ideas on the best approach to funding? What do you perceive to be the most troublesome challenges with federal or other sources of funding?
Are you directing that to any of us?
Any of you.
I mean, go ahead.
Go ahead, ladies, Ruth.
I guess the only thing I would just quickly say is, we thought we were there with childcare. We all kind of thought with Build Back Better that we would see childcare included. There was a $450 billion childcare and universal preschool piece to that bill that just got kiboshed, right, within the Democratic Party. And so, this issue, patchwork is hard. It's hard, but it's all we have right now is how we try and piece all these things together. But to me, it's this national effort to build this momentum. We need advocates from every community, every state, all working to call for these investments.
Jason, you had something on that?
Yeah, I think when one of the things that I've always, what's the game plan or what's the strategy, right? Who do we want to be? And, you can't build that plane while you're flying it, right? You have to map that out because I'll tell you, places like North Carolina and Boston and other places, and Ruth and Blake pointed to this in their presentations, other states are doing these things. So then the question becomes, why aren't we? And 9 times out of 10, and this is one of the reasons why I got out of politics too. Sometimes it was just the dumbest stuff to be against. Like literally, it wasn't even about the issue. It was because some knucklehead didn't like another knucklehead. And so now you got 2 knuckleheads holding up the entire process of us being better as a state. And so the problem is we need leadership. Who are we? Who do we want to be as Wisconsinites? That's how you get to these issues. And it doesn't have to be a one side has to win all. It takes all of us. And so we've gotten to a point where we prefer to, and Ruth mentioned it, and I've seen it before, we will sacrifice perfection over progress. If it's not perfect, that means we can't do anything. And we are losing because of that. And so that has to be someone, whether it's Governor Evers and Robin Vos, somebody has to say, I'm tired. We're not here to fight each other, right? We're not here to fight each other. We're here to move the state forward. And there are enough issues for us to fight about, but at least be willing to come to the table and go, this is my vision. How can I help your vision? How can we do this? Because if you look at the things Blake talked about, if you look at the things Ruth talked about, I can guarantee you that if we don't solve those issues, hell, it won't be any of us left to be talking about any of this stuff. So at some point, we got to put that stuff to the side. We lost roughly around, I'm going to say 3,000, maybe 170,000 youth workers. I think the Counties Association came out with a report. That's a problem. That's a huge problem because nobody wants to come to a place where childcare transportation, all these other issues are at the forefront. Who wants to live there when you have to deal with all that stuff? When North Carolina or Boston and all these other places saying, hey, we will help you with your child. Our businesses will have enough sense to not look at these as charitable donations, but rather investments into the people, because we want to bring the best out of our people. And in order to get the best out of our people, we got to make sure childcare and transportations, we're part of that solution. So though it's not necessarily the money, it's the freaking attitude. It's the attitude of the people in charge. That's the problem. If everybody came to be humble and just be freaking nice, right? And understand that whenever you're pointing your finger at somebody, it's always 3 pointing back at you. Stop with the holier than thou attitudes. Come to the table willing to sacrifice, because your mission at the end of the day is to leave a legacy behind that will empower other people to be successful. We've lost that. We've lost that as a community because we keep electing knucklehead people who only want power. At the end of the day, that's what it's about. Sorry, now I'm done.
Blake, do you have anything to add on that topic?
Oh, I can't really follow Jason, but I guess when, because I totally agree with everything you just said. When I think of, how to get more federal funding, I really think of the theme that I'm seeing here is really when people have come together to fight for something. So Jason, you mentioned the Fight for 15 and, people speaking up and saying, I deserve not just a job, but I deserve a good job. And I deserve that basic income. Ruth, the work that you're doing around parents and educators telling their stories and saying, look, we deserve this, we deserve better. And I've learned a lot from leaders in the basic income movement around the power of storytelling, and particularly around demanding these basic needs. I don't think what all three of us are asking for is really anything radical. I think it's really basic needs: to have a good job, to be able to take care of your family, have a place to live, and have your kids taken care of. And so it's a little Pollyanna-ish, but if there's power of that movement coming together to be able to fight for that federal funding, because that's really the only place where it's enough to be able to make sustainable change.
So I'm going to kind of paraphrase or restate the last couple of questions that I think are really getting at the idea. Isn't it really in the interest of employers to have adequate child care, to have, a workforce that can get to work, to pay people enough that they want to work? And are we, because of the shortage of workers that a lot of employers are complaining about right now, are we seeing any changes from the business community as being more receptive to these changes that you're talking about?
From the smart ones, Sue, from the smart ones, from the ones who get it. I'm gonna answer that, but Blake, I'm glad you said something, because I want to put this out there. You all remember we were fighting and everybody was fighting over the $15 an hour. Imagine what would have happened if we had did that before. Now you can't even hire anybody for $15 an hour. So imagine the time we would have saved and the people we would have already had in place had we met that ask already. And so you ask, Sue, is the business community, some business communities some businesses are getting it. I think Quick Trip is doing, I hear great stuff. I haven't investigated it yet, but they're looking at it, and there's talk about them doing childcare. We have to get the business community, again, to stop looking at this stuff as if it's a donation. No, this isn't an investment in your people. If you want the best for people, you have to invest in them. And I'll say this, what COVID did was threw everything out the window. The way we used to do things and how we thought everything should be, that's gone. COVID-19, the pandemic exposed us for all our weaknesses. And it basically said, here's the new stuff you got to deal with. You better figure it out. We cannot go into this and solve this with an old mindset that, oh, businesses shouldn't be involved in these things. Yes, they should, or you will be shutting your doors, right? Because we have to think innovatively, creatively, and everybody has to put something in it. We all have to, whether it's sacrifice or invest. This is not charity. This is what do we need to do to make it work for the entire community. You don't get to sit on the sideline and say, that's not something we should be doing. Them days are over.
One of the things that we've been doing, we've been hosting with chambers, technical colleges. We've been doing a series of legislative forums across the state where we're bringing private sector leaders to the table with legislators. And we're targeting key Republican districts where you see strong Republican leadership. Because there is a deep story to be told right now, and legislators need to hear from business leaders that this is an issue. They have told us that. They have said, we need to hear from parents and we need to hear from business leaders. So we're doing forums across the state. We've done Mark Klein's district and Lemahieu's district. We've done Feltzkowski. We've done probably 7 or 8 big forums. We've done Mark Bourne's district with Jagler. Where we're getting 20, 30, 40 businesses to show up to say, this is an issue for us. We can't hire people. We can't increase our wages enough to cover this difference. We need the state to make an investment. And I think that the big challenge is who's doing the lifting, right? We need different messengers. It can't be me going to the Capitol. I've done that. I'll keep doing it, but that's not who they need to hear from. They need to hear from business leaders that say, this is an issue. It's time for us to do something because it's impacting my bottom line. It's impacting my profitability. I'm Vernon Memorial Healthcare. I can't hire a surgeon because they came for an interview and they said, give me your list of high quality childcare. And there wasn't any in my community, right? Those are the stories that will compel legislators to say, it's time to make change happen with this, right? So again, I think how we coordinate, how we do a campaign, how we come with one key message, whether it's a transportation message, whether it's a healthcare message, whether it's a raise to minimum income, paid family leave, we come with one voice, we lift the same messages over and over and over again. It's hard. It's expensive. We've got to have, the policy chops and the money behind being able to do that. But to me, that's where we will get leverage on this. We've also been doing a series of webinars for business leaders where it's CEOs coming to talk about this is what's impacting my business, to call for that state investment.
And Blake, we'll give you the last word here. We're almost out of time.
I think what Ruth and Jason have said is spot on, that economic insecurity affects everyone. It affects businesses and it affects every single person in the community. And I guess the only part that I would raise is that I think there's a lot of interesting work being done around companies or businesses that are augmenting wages in some way. Ruth and Jason have alluded to a few of them, or adding bonuses, or some being really creative and thinking about how to get more money into their employees' pockets, which I think is really great and needed. And there's a lot of people who do not participate in the formal workforce. They don't have an employer or a formal employer, but those benefits can still affect the entire community, which I think is really important. So as Ruth said, just keeping to come back that message of why this is so needed and why it affects every single part of our life is really key.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks to our panelists and to all the audience participants for joining in this forum. We appreciate hearing about the work of your organizations and hope that we can work together in the future. The League's discussion units will be meeting next week to discuss the issues presented here tonight. Information about how to join a discussion unit is on the League's website, lwvdanecounty.org. Technical support tonight has been provided by Julia Gilden. And this forum was planned by the work group, including Marty Stamper, Nancy Schur, and Susan Stein. Thanks to them. Amanda Hingst assisted with the resource material editing and formatting. Thanks to all of them. The resource materials containing more information and links to organizations working on these issues can be found on the League website. Finally, our future forums coming up, January 9th, the state constitution, are changes necessary? February 9th, the impact of Wisconsin Supreme Court cases. March 9th, judicial integrity. Should judges decide cases involving their campaign contributors? We also have advocacy work groups on these and other topics. Information about all of these events will be available on the League website. Thanks to all of you, and I hope you all enjoy the holiday season. Good night.